Sure. So how you guys doing? Good? Great. Last session of the day. Those of you just walking in, I actually just got done explaining the meaning of life. I'm sorry that you missed it. I don't have time to go over it again. I do appreciate you coming, though. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If I get too loud, you guys tell me to shut up. If I get too quiet, you tell me to speak up. We'll do it that way. So we're going to talk about the painters, the policemen, and the Pope, and what that has to do with, at all, with Microsoft Project. Has anybody ever heard me talk about that before in the room? Maybe one or two? Okay. So, yeah, we'll talk about that today. We'll get going on how we're going to use the painters and policemen and the Pope to understand some things about Microsoft Project. All right. So you're in the right place. Let's get going. My name's Tрэвис Krittenden. I have been working with Microsoft Project from an IT perspective for a very long time. I worked at a company called Cox Communications for 12 and a half years. And in there, we implemented Project Server for the IT department, stood up an IT PMO as part of that process as well. And had some really great experiences with that. In 2009, I got the gift of layoff and started my own, got the gift of entrepreneurship at the same time. Who knew? Started my own business called Plan Further. And Plan Further is dedicated to helping people like you guys with Microsoft Project Server implementations and integration. So I'm a PMP, an MCT, and anybody ever heard of Learning Tree, by the way? All right, so if you take the Microsoft Project class at Learning Tree, you'll have Media Tank for that. I wrote that class. Same thing for the Project Server class. All right? Anybody ever taken that class there? No? Okay. It's a good class. Fantastic, fantastic class. If I do say so myself. Break my arm, pat myself on the back. So, Plan Further. What do we do? We do consulting. We also do integration services. And because for the last 3 years we've been doing a lot of customizations, and customers like yourself say, hey, you know what, I wish Project Server did this thing better, differently, more my way. We have a series of things that we're going to be launching this year. We're very excited about that stuff, which is one of the reasons I want to talk to you. I want to make sure that you knew who we were and to expect some cool things to come out of our website in the future, okay? So be looking for that. All right. So, anybody ever asked that question? Why did that happen? Yeah. Yeah. There's maybe some expletives in your version of the question, right? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. All right. Why did that task just move? We hit that the very first time I started using Microsoft Project. What do? You go in, you type in a task name. Oh, that's easy. I can do this, just like Excel. You go over, you do some other stuff. You type in somebody it might be assigned to. You type in another task, another one. And about 30 minutes later, you're pulling your hair out, right? You just haven't read a book, you don't know, what's going on here? So a lot of us start from that space, and depending on our experiences over life, we may or may not have answers to some of the reasons why tasks move in Microsoft Project. What I want to do today is help you come to a place where you've got quick answers for why did that task move that way? Can you anticipate how that task moved? We were talking earlier, right? The challenge isn't so much that we need to stop Microsoft Project from doing the math that it does or moving the things around like it thinks it should, because it's actually built very wise to do that stuff. It's got some really good logic in there to do all of that stuff. What we need to change, usually, is our perspective, our anticipation, our ability to anticipate what is going to happen with that task movement that's there, okay? So that's kind of what this session is going to be all about. How do I really get to grips on that stuff, okay? And understand it from maybe a new perspective. So let's have a little show of hands. We're going to have a very interactive session with you guys. Is that okay? Great. All right, so show of hands. Everybody put your hand up. We'll start with that. Everybody put your hand up. At least one is good, yeah. All right, so who has used Microsoft Project for more than 3 years? Ooh. All right, more than 5. All right, more than 8. Ooh, more than 10. Wow, I got some more than 10s. Okay. Who's used it more than, see how far back that would be. Wow, more than 15. I've got a couple in the back. Wow, all right, give them a hand. That's awesome. Very good. That's fantastic. You guys want to come up here and I'll come sit down? You can deal with that? No? Okay. All right. Fantastic. All right. Glad you're here. Hopefully, if nothing else, for those of you who've used it for more than 15 years, you might take away less than people who have been using it for around 3 years, right? Maybe. But I do want everybody to take away something. So we're going to talk about different tips and different tricks on how to understand some things. All right. So conference going pretty well for everybody so far? Yes? All right. All right, so we're going to hit our mark today. We're going to get through our session. We're going to go have some fun at the event, I promise. Okay, so I know you're here for the painters, the policemen, and the Pope. But first, we've got to talk about the usual suspects. So when we think about task movement inside of Microsoft Project, the great question for all the new users that pick it up and try to use it for the first time, there's a handful of things that we can always count on to be in play. Right? Handful of things that we should always maybe first look at when our mind turns to, well, why did it do that to me? I don't deserve that, you know? So one of the things we can look at are our duration settings. Now, piece of cake, right? Duration's duration. First thing we do with it, we put a duration in. Oh, that's obvious, right? We're going to go through and we're going to talk a little bit about some things with duration that we just need to keep an eye on. All right? So there's normal duration settings. What do we have? We have minutes. By the way, anybody use minutes in their project schedules as durations? I don't want to work on your project, by the way. Is that okay? Is that all right? No, I don't want to do that. No? Yeah. That half-a-minute task, I'm not interested in being accountable for that one. Hours, how about that? Okay, who uses hours on some of your tasks? I've had some of those, sure. 4-hour durations, that kind of stuff. Days, yeah, it's default, isn't it? Yeah, we get days by default. That's what most of mine are. Weeks. Months? Okay, a couple of months, yeah. So you go from one end to the other, don't you? That's awesome. All right, so there's shorthands. And those of you who've been using it for 15 years, you know that there's shorthands for all of these settings, right? Minutes would be what? What letter? If I want to type in, I'll do it for you, right? It's M, yeah. So if I want to type in 5 minutes, it's 5M, and I get 5 minutes, right? So I'll pull up my demo machine here. We'll go through that real quick. No problem. It's a good chance for me to try it out, make sure it's all working. There we go. You guys see that? Okay, so 5 minutes, 10 minutes in this case, right? My duration will be 10M. That's the shorthand for it. 10 minutes. All right. All right. How about 10 hours? 10H. All right, that's my shorthand there. 10 days? 10D, of course. How about 10 weeks? 10W. All right, what about the next one? What's 10 months going to be? 10 what? MO. Yeah, not M, because we've already used that one. So 10 MO. How about a year? How do I do 10 years or a year? 1Y. Oh, you're probably right. Let's try that. Whoop. Not so much, right? So we can't do that, right? Our upper limit is months. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do 12 MO. There's our 1 year task. Is that okay? That's how it works. It better be okay. All right. Okay. So elapsed duration is another setting that we have. Now, anybody ever use elapsed duration for anything in your plans? Okay, a few of you have. You're great. All right. I like elapsed duration. It's a problem solver sometimes, isn't it? We can use it to solve problems. In fact, you'll actually see elapsed duration behind the scenes other places in the tool. Okay? Let me show you what it does. All right? We'll go through it. It puts the task, and you can see it on here on the slide, right? So it puts the task into a 24/7 clock. All right? Let's talk about that for a moment. Now, let's say I've got some concrete that I'm pouring for a foundation. And of course, all of these are contrived examples I'm going to be showing you today, and some task A and task B, really complex task names, right? But we've got some concrete that we've poured. You guys can imagine that. So much concrete, it took me 2 days to do it. A lot. It's going to have to cure for, let's say, 100 hours, which is probably very low for that much concrete. But it has to cure. So what's wrong with what I have up here? Yeah, it's way longer than actually just being 100 hours. What's going on here? It's going 100 hours, but it's only happening 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And it's taking a break for lunch. Does concrete curing take a break for lunch? No. Okay, so what do we need to do about that? We're going to have to use this handy-dandy feature I was just talking about called elapsed duration. And the way that we do that, we put an E right in front of whatever duration you have. E days or E hours or E minutes for you, right? E minutes. I got 100 E hours. And what's that going to do to this task, you think? Shorten it up. Because why? It runs on a 24/7 clock now, right? Which it should, right? It's concrete curing. It doesn't care when lunchtime is. It just goes. So now it's 100 hours long, right? Starting right now, going for the next 100 hours, and then it's done. Does that make some sense? Yeah? Okay. Anybody ever have a task like that in their plan that they could use that on? Sure. So those of you who don't use it today, I'll bet you do. I'll bet you have once in a while something like that. IT world, we used to have to scrub disks, right? Put new disks in our sand, we'd have to scrub them, and they would go and go and go and go and go, and roughly 24 hours later we'd have that. Sometimes backups would run that same way. So we've got things that don't stop at 5 o'clock, that don't stop on the weekends and take a break. Those are the good examples for where I might use that. Okay? So that's elapsed duration. That's basically, duration's a simple thing. It's kind of task movement-wise, one of the things to look out for, right? The elapsed duration setting. Okay. So we did the demo. So what's the best practices? Well, one of the things is, and you guys might already know this, one of the things is that duration estimates that you use aren't always equal to work estimates. Does anybody agree with me when I say that? Okay, right? So I throw out the idea that maybe it's like your commute. Anybody have a really long commute? Yes? How long is your commute in the back? 45 minutes? I can beat that. Who's got a longer commute than 45 minutes? How about you? Hour 10? Anybody longer than hour 10? All right, so hour 10. Out of an hour 10, I'm going to ask you, how many minutes do you think your car is actually really working instead of just sitting there? About an hour of that, right? So it's not exactly the same. I live in Atlanta. Mine might be more like about 30 minutes out of an hour and a half, right? I could be going, much faster if the speed limit and the kind of traffic and all that stuff wasn't in my way. I could get there whenever I want. But I can't. So my car works periodically during my commute, right? That's the same thing for your resources on your project sometimes. I'm sure you got resources that, I'll get to that thing, right? Or it takes me 40 hours, but really it takes them about 5 hours to do that thing, right? Okay. All right, so where do we find good estimates? That's also a good best practice. Also, if we're going to have these estimates, how can we find good estimates? Where do we find them? I've got some things up here, right? History, last project we did, something similar that we've done. Subject matter expertise is also a good place to find estimates. Sometimes industry guidance will drive where you get your estimates from, right? So as long as we're going to be putting in duration of minutes, hours, weeks, and months, have some story to tell about why you chose that duration value, right? As long as we're going to be doing that, it's a good best practice. Okay, how do we get better at estimating? Practice, same idea, right? Start estimating, right? A lot of times we go to our SMEs, our subject matter experts, and we don't allow them to really estimate things. We just tell them, you go do that thing, right? You go build that thing for me, all right? And I've given you 100 hours to get that done. I've given you a day to get that done, right? We can get them to give us better estimates if we include them in the planning process. So my challenge to you, of course, is to make sure that you do include your SMEs in your planning process. I like to literally let them build my plan for me if I can. Okay. So let's move on to link types. All right, so why do we link tasks? How many of you guys work on projects where you don't link the tasks? It's a valid thing to do. Okay, so I got a few, all right, yeah. So I'm of the belief that there are things like, the shopping list my wife gives me. I don't really need that linked, right? I don't need to know, first get the milk, then go get this other thing. That's okay. There's some stuff like that in life. But for the most part, I like my projects to have a really great set of links, okay? I'm of the the old school, critical path kind of guy. I like the sticky notes on the wall. That's where I come from, right? So I like to link the tasks. So I link the task because I know that change happens, right? You could rephrase that however you like. I like, change happens. So task movement will impact other tasks. And reasonably, if I've done a good job at linking my tasks, it should, right? It should impact the other tasks. If one task moves, the other one should follow suit. Well, of course, linking tasks has got a great amount of bearing on task movement in our plan, okay? So you need to fully understand the task link types that we've got available to us and what they do, what the rules are. We sometimes have some misconceptions about these 4 different task link types, and I want to talk about them. Okay, so the default that we get is finish to start. That's our finish to start task link type. Every time you create a link between 2 tasks, for the most part, you get a finish to start link to begin with. Okay, so if I said this task connects to that one, the first one has to finish before the next one can start, right? Using the car metaphor, I have to turn the key before I can drive to work, right? This has to be that way. I can't reverse that. That's just how it is. Sometimes it's hard logic. Sometimes it's preferential logic. I want to do it this way, right? Makes some sense for us to do it that way. Start to start. What does start to start mean? Task has to start right here, and the second one can start, right? Something like that. We'll talk about that in a moment, yeah. So I'll give you an example of that. So a good example, a good story behind a start-to-start task would be fence posts and fence rails. I put up a fence in my house recently, and we had to dig the holes and put the fence posts in, and then string the rails between those 2 fence posts. How many fence posts did I have to have before I could put the rails up, though? 2. Right, so the start relationship there is that what goes first? The posts, right? And then the rails go after that. So there is a relationship there. I can't have both of them start independently of each other. I can't do the rails first. I got to have this one, and then the other one can start. Finish to finish is the same thing, but it's reversed, right? So finish to finish, a good example of that might be proofreading a book that someone's written, right? So if I proofread a book, I can't really finish proofreading a book until the first task of writing the book has already been done, right? It's got to be complete before I can complete my proofreading. Is that fair? Okay. All right. And then start to finish is the one that I don't really use a lot. Does anybody use start to finish a lot? Not a lot. Anybody use start to finish? Okay, fair enough. What did you use it for? Okay, so you had a situation where you needed to connect tasks, one that needed to be done, another one that needed to be done in a series of events that kind of related, right? So I'm going to show you an example of how I might use that. I'll be honest with you, I don't use it a lot. So you're in good company there. If you don't use it a lot, that's okay. All right. So let's go talk about our task link types. All right. So you've been here before, right? You got to link some tasks together. I've got a few tasks prepared. I'll just link these guys. I'll highlight them. I could click on this little link icon there. I could also right-click on them and use the link icon that's here. If you didn't know, everybody using 2010, Project 2010 in the room? Okay. Anybody using 2007? Show your hand. Okay, great. All right. So I like 2010. It does take a little bit to get used to the ribbon, but once you do, it's so much faster. It's much better. I love it. So I'm going to link these tasks that way, and I have a finish to start relationship between them. All right, you can see the little arrow over there. The little blue arrow says, hey, you know what? Between these 2 tasks, I'm going to show you that I've got a finish to start relationship. So that means the first one I have to finish before the next one can start. Start to start, we'll use our same example of the fence posts and the fence rails. I'll link them together, and the first thing that I get back is, of course, the standard type, the start to finish, or the finish to start. And if I change my type, if I want to change my type, I can actually do it a few different places. My favorite, I'll do it again so you guys can watch me do it, is to actually just, if you're careful with the mouse, actually just double-click on the arrow. And I get the ability, once I do that, to change to whatever type I'd like. So I'll click on Start to Start, and that'll be my new type. And there we go. So one of the misconceptions we have here about start-to-start tasks, and this is a good place for us to anticipate task movement. If you have these kinds of tasks on your plan, the real rule here isn't that they start at the same time. That's not what the rule is. They can start at the same time, but the second one has to start either at the same time or any time after. All right? So I'm allowed to, if I want to drag this thing left or right, I'm allowed to make this one start any time after. Okay? Can I make it start any time before, though? No, I can't. I can't drag it this way, because what's going to happen if I drop right here? Yeah, it didn't like that so much. Yeah, it doesn't want me to do that. It says, no, there's a relationship. There's a rule in play that you can't go earlier than that other task. You can go any time after. That's cool. Finish to finish is the same way, right? So I'll link these two guys together again. I'll double-click the arrow. Whoops. Again, you got to be handy with the mouse. Double-click the arrow, make a finish to finish. And it's the same rule. I can go to the right, so it can happen any time after the first one, but I can't happen before. Right? I can't finish before. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the last one is, oh, that's written wrong. Start to finish predecessor, start to finish successor. So I'm going to change it to a start to finish, click OK. I got a prompt. By the way, what do we do with all the prompts that Microsoft Project shows us? We turn them off, we ignore them, yeah, good answers, okay. So we're going to do that, yeah, whatever you said. And then I've got my two tasks linked in that ultimately unusual start to finish relationship, right? So what does that start to finish say? The start of this task and the finish of the next task have to either be at the exact same moment or they need to overlap some, right? So the rule here, if I can move these things around, is that they have to have some amount of overlap. Why would I need to do that, right? So what's a good purpose for this? One of the things I might use this for is a soft cutover, right? So if I've got a payroll system that's processing and I want to stand up a new one, I don't really take this, unplug one and plug the power cord into the next one and just hope for the best, right? That might not be the wisest thing. I might not have a job much longer, right? So instead, what I've got to do is I've got to have some kind of soft transition there. And this allows me to kind of play with that. I have some kind of soft transition. Are there other ways to get that same effect? Sure, yeah. There's a lot of ways in Microsoft Project to do the same thing. But this is just, it's a good explanation of how you might wind up using that. Okay. All right, so let's get back to our slides. All right. So what are the best practices here? I like to link my tasks, my subtasks, maybe my milestones, but I don't always link my summary tasks. You might have a different opinion on that. That's cool if you do. Some places I'll see people only linking summary tasks, and I'm okay with that. What I don't like to see usually is blending of that, right? Pick one or the other. That's a good best practice, right? Either go the route of, intentionally linking your summary tasks, or go the route of linking the tasks themselves. But probably not blending them so much. There are versions of this tool, especially if you go, you save it back into earlier versions and pass that off to a vendor that you're working with, a client that you're working with. Their 2003 version might not appreciate that so much. So, anybody ever had that problem come up? Besides me? Yeah? Okay. Good. All right. All right. We learned that lesson. Okay, so when we link, we want to make sure that each task has at least one predecessor and one successor. That's, again, for my PMI, critical path kind of thinking, right? That I like to have a start milestone. I like to have all my tasks linked to one another. If they don't have a link on the left and the right, we call that a hanging task. Anybody ever heard that kind of thinking? Yeah? I think it's good medicine, right? Try to have some of that kind of stuff in your plan. Once you get used to it, it's very, very helpful. All right. More usual suspects. Lag and lead. So what does lag and lead do? Do you guys use lag or lead, by the way? Some of you? Okay, great. All right, so I've got a couple stories to tell about that. So what does lag do? Lag delays our tasks, right? Lag is a delay, right? I remember back in the day talking, I used to work at IBM way back, and talking across to our British office. there was this terrible echo that came back and forth across the phone line back in those days, right? And so, you'd get that lag, right? I would say something, it'd take a while for them to respond, that kind of thing. Okay. Lag is exactly that. It's that delay, and it's forced between, in project, right? In project sense, it's forced between two tasks. So one of the reasons we might use that is that there's a fixed amount of time between the time I order some equipment and the time it shows up, okay? Or the time that you complete your project or your task and the time I can start mine. That might happen. All right? So lead is the opposite of lag. Lead accelerates that task. Lead does the overlap, right? It says, you used to be maybe finished to start. You're still finished to start, but I just want you sooner. I just want you to have, some overlap here. I'm going to go ahead and start you sooner than you used to be. All right. And the quote at the top, that was me talking to my wife about our recent remodel, right? So we did have the idea that we could lay the carpet and paint at the same time. Is that a good idea usually? No, not a good idea usually. It can be stressful on the marriage. All right, so yeah. So lag and lead. Let's do a demo on lag and lead real quick. And I want to show you a couple of cool things about lag and lead that you may not use so much. Anybody work on software development type stuff or deliverables that are just maybe either in sprints, like 2-week sprints, or have 4 or 6 weeks or whatever kind of interval to them, and you do those in a cyclical fashion? I'll show you something about that in just a moment. So, all right. So here's lag and lead, right? So I got my foundation poured, and I got to frame the house. But what do I have to do? We talked about the concrete curing earlier, right? I got to wait. I got to wait until concrete's ready. So I might have some amount of lag here. And where am I going to add lag? Same place I've been adding it. I can actually double-click this thing, or I could double-click the task itself. And if I go to my predecessors tab, you'll see that there's a column for lag, all right? But I'm going to go double-click this guy, and I'm going to put lag in here of, what do you guys say? How long should I wait after I pour concrete before I frame?
7 days.
7 days. I like that. I got other things I can be doing. 7 days. All right, so what happens if my first task in this relationship, maybe the foundation pouring, is late? What happens if that's a few days late? Should I still wait 7 days? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Am I waiting 7 days? Kind of. I'm waiting 7 business days, which is, not many construction people are going to come and work on, Sunday afternoon. Some are. Who knows? I could, just to point it out to you, though, I could do, remember that elapsed duration? I could do 7E days. What would that do, you think? Right. Literally runs that thing on as the crow flies, right? Literally runs it on the calendars across the calendar without caring, whether it's Saturday or not, right? So it's literally 7 days at that point.
It's not. It's 9.
What's that?
It's 9.
Yeah. It's what?
It's 9.
It's snowing.
It's 9.
Oh, it's 9. I was like, why is it snowing? All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's 9 days. Why is it 9 days? It's very good. Yeah. So fair enough. I will. Well, we'll get back to that because the answer is that it didn't want to start the next event after this particular task until Monday. It wanted to take the weekend there. All right, so paint the really big room and install the carpet again. Right? There's a relationship to be had here. This is probably the proper relationship as it is right now. Should we leave it? Yes, we should, but the problem is we've got to have it done faster, of course. So what are we going to do about that? We're going to use lead. And if I want to do lead, it's the same thing as doing lag. It's just negative, right? So if I want to overlap that by 2 days, I can minus 2D. And there we go. Now, here's one thing I'll tell you about lead. I like lead. I like it a lot because I don't really usually use it during planning. I use it during execution. You guys ever update your project after you get done planning it? Anybody? I got some giggles. Yeah, I've been in that boat early on until it bit me. All right, so this is it, right? Yeah, so I've got lag and lead. Lead does the overlapping. Now, why does that interest me so much is because it tells a story, a visual story here of something I like to relate it to fast tracking, right? So if I want to fast track, the idea, PMI idea, is that For fast tracking, what we're doing is we're doing some acceleration of that other task. We're kind of overlaying some tasks that we're not intentionally supposed to be done that way. And when we fast track, usually we're introducing some extra things. Maybe in this case, what? Risk. It's a good answer, yeah. Risk. What's the risk? I'm going to get paint all over my carpet. Yeah, not a great idea. Okay. So yeah, maybe we're willing to accept that risk. Maybe that turned out okay. In our case, it did actually turn out okay, and we did get done on time. We're all happy about that. But so yeah, that's risk when you kind of overlap it. But it's a nice story to see, isn't it? Later in life, we can see that. Okay, nice thing to do. All right, so that's one thing I'll do to kind of get my schedule back on track. All right, so that's lag and lead for the most part. Oh, I want to show you one more thing, sorry. One more thing with lag and lead. I've got a second demo that I wanted to point out to a couple of you that we talked about. Now, here I've got, albeit a very, very simple plan, I've got a start milestone. I've got a task to write 9 chapters. That could be a sprint. If you're doing development work, that could be, whatever, right? Whatever you'd like it to be. But you have some kind of cycle to this work, right? So I want to show you how you can build something clever out of this. I'll do some linking. By the way, if you grab one of these tasks, milestone, whatever, you drag straight down, you get that handy link line. You guys use that at all? Anybody use that? Yeah, okay. So we do that, and then I can link these things like I'd like to, right? So as soon as I start my project, I can start writing these chapters. That makes some sense to me. I can also think about my review. Now, I'm probably not going to do my review day 1, but maybe what I really would do instead would be to add some lag to that. Okay? So I'm going to add some lag to that. And instead of putting, a certain amount of days in there, I can actually just put 33%. So, whoops, I did it wrong, didn't I? There we go. Sorry. So I'm going to link these things together, change it to a start to start. I got ahead of myself. And then I'm going to put a 33% lag in here. So what's that do? That allows me to wait 33% through that task before I actually do that review. I could go ahead and do that same thinking with the rest of these, right? First I link it, then I change it to a start to start. And then instead of 33%, maybe it's 66%. Same thing for the third one, right? So we could go all the way through our project like that if we'd like to. And what that does for us is that allows us to say, hey, you know what? I've got a really nice dynamic schedule. Okay? Oops, I didn't do my start. All right. 100%. Or I could do 99, I guess. Start, there we go. And then, of course, I can link all these things down to my finish milestone, as I'd like to. And I'll come up with this nice, pretty little box at the end of the day. So what this does is this allows me to simply say, hey, you know what, there's some dependencies here that are fairly dynamic, right? Does that make some sense? Okay. So what happens if writing 9 chapters takes longer than 19 days, which, by the way, it probably will, all right? All right, maybe I'll go to 40 days. These things stay, they stay inside of their dynamic, right? They're kind of they're a ratio. They're a third of the way through, 2/3 of the way through, and then all the way through, right? That's when we're going to have those reviews. Does that make some sense? Is that something you guys might use? Yeah? Okay, sure, all right. So, best practices. If you're going to add lag or lead, put some notes in, please. No telling when you're going to be out of the office and somebody's got to deal with task movement on your plan, and you are expecting that, but they're not, right? You can anticipate it, they can't. Put some notes in that, right? Have a little note icon there. I like to use lead when fast tracking. I think lead's very, very helpful for that. Okay? All right. I think it's easy to notice that adjustment once we do it. We talked about that. When we have fast tracking, usually we introduce some risk, like our paint and our carpet. Something for you guys to take away. Hey, you know what? If I'm doing that overlap just to get my project back on track, there is a cost somewhere to doing that usually. Look for it. Okay? What else is there? Calendars. Calendars are fundamental. Right? We could use Excel for a lot of this stuff, but the calendars really make project differentiate itself, that and the linking, make sure it's differentiated from Excel by a wide margin, right? People that use Excel, that came from the Excel world, use that for project management. Once you come to project, you eventually come to appreciate all of the things that the calendars do for you, all the things that those links do for you, right? All right, and of course, when do all the Mayan projects have to get done? Sometime this year, right? Because there's no more calendar for them, yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about this, right? So projects can be, calendars can customize the days that are available for working. They can customize, days that you're not working, right? So you can have the, I'm going to come in on a Saturday, or you take a company holiday, any of that kind of stuff. We can also customize the working times every day, right? So we can customize what that looks like. I came from a place where they had a summer hours program. You guys ever see that? No? Yeah, you should have one of those. It's very good. It was 4 10-hour days, and then off on Friday. It was very nice for the summer. It made my job as a PM a little hard. But who knows? Maybe it'll all get done eventually. So we customize calendars by applying them, and we customize our calendars. We apply them to projects, resources, and tasks. So our projects can have a custom calendar, our resources can have a custom calendar, and our tasks can have a custom calendar. Okay? We'll talk about that.
So which ones take priority?
Which ones take priority? Right. So if you have all three in play, we'll start with that scenario, right? That's a great question. So if I've got all three of them in play, I've got a resource custom calendar, I've got a task custom calendar, and I've got a project custom calendar. The way that it works is that the resource calendar will be applied to or combined with either the task calendar if there is one, or if there's no task calendar, the project calendar. All right? So the resource calendar gets combined with one of the other two. There's only two in play at any moment. All right? So resource calendar, task calendar, project calendar. You'll get resource first combined with the task calendar. So I have to do the resource is going to do the work within what the task parameters are. Okay? And it'll ignore, at that point, what the project calendar says. That's because if you think about it, there would be no other way for us to override what the project calendar said other than changing the project calendar. We couldn't have a task that was just separate from that without that. So, but anyway, okay, so here's a demo for task movement and calendars. We'll do that real quick. All right. All right. So if I've got a holiday, I'll scoot this back over. I got a holiday on January the 2nd. I can apply that, and you'll kind of recognize this a little bit. I'm not going to get way down deep into your question, but I can go to my Change Working Time tool, and for my project calendar, I can actually say, hey, you know what? On January 2nd, I have a holiday here. And if I do that, a couple things happen, right? My task moved, didn't it? Right? So it's obeying what the project calendar says. That's good. What else happened? Got a little gray bar, didn't I? Got a little extra grayed out area over there. Okay, fair enough. All right. What if I have a task that is delayed due to a scheduled outage? We're going to have a power outage in our data center, so you can't really do anything during that time, okay? So I've got a task here. I need to adjust my task. If I double-click on my task, I can come down and I can see what calendar it's using. So I'm going to pick out a calendar that I've pre-created called Task Calendar. What a great name for that, isn't it? All right, so I've got Task Calendar here. I can click OK, and now it's going to start using that Task Calendar. And if I go look at what that Task Calendar said, all I do is I go back to that Change Working Time dialog and I find the Task Calendar. You'll see that I already had added a scheduled outage for Monday. Now, this is the only task currently in the plan that will obey that outage. It's just this one task, right? So it's kind of hard to see a little bit whether or not that's in play when you're talking about task movement, whether that's in play for you. But if you use the indicators column, you can hover over anything there and read what's going on with that task. In fact, there's other ways as well for you to get more information from this, okay? There's several things in the tool that allow you to do that. But the task calendar, called Task Calendar, is assigned to this task. And you can see that it's moved it past Monday. Now, I might like to see that gray bar over here like I was able to see the holiday on January 2nd. So if I right-click, and if I go to non-working time, I can choose which calendar I'm currently looking at on the right-hand side. In this case, I'll say task calendar. And you'll see that now Monday is grayed out, right? It's that day, that power outage is there, okay? So this allows us to do some clever things. If you're suspicious, right-click over there. Is that affecting my task movement? Right-click over there. Show the calendar that you think is in play here and see what's going on with it. That way you can have great visibility to it. We can solve problems that we can see, okay? All right, and finally, we've got tasks with a resource on a summer hours program like me. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to that task, which happens in the summer. And we'll take a look real quick at what the change working time has to say about that particular task. So I'm going to go to my resource sheet and take a look at me. And you'll see right now that I'm using just the standard calendar. That means I'm going to obey that holiday on January 2nd, but nothing else. So I might want to change the base calendar for me to something else, right? Maybe the one called summer hours. Now, every resource has a base calendar, right? Just like standard or just like summer hours in this case. And you can also lay on top of that any customizations for that one resource that you would like. Their own vacation, right? Their own holidays. That doesn't apply to all of the resources. That's just for them. So resources are a little special. They get a calendar that's a base calendar, and they apply their own customizations individually on top of that. Okay? So be aware of that. You guys use resources on your plans. Worry about calendars a little bit. This is a good tip for you. All right? Great. So let's go back and see what my Gantt chart looks like now. Ooh, wow. Let's take a look at that calendar then. I'm going to go back to my project, click on Change Working Time. It looks a little funny to me. If I look at my summer hours program, it says what? That I'm coming in during the summer. I'll have to go to the summer here, right? And I'm coming in and I'm doing some work between 8 and 5, Monday through Friday, which is not right, actually. There we go. That's better. Okay, so in my summer hours program, I am supposed to be doing... What is going on? Sorry, the moment got messed up. I could set this to be fixed by, okay, I'm not going to push you through it. There's a problem with the demo. I could set this to be fixed by saying, oh, well, you know what, I'm coming in 2 hours early every day, but if you'll notice, I'm showing right here my task starts at 8 instead of the 6 o'clock that I'm coming in, okay? So I need to pay attention to what time my tasks are starting by default, okay? Yes?
Can you do all these on a server environment?
Yes, all of this can be happening on a server environment. In fact, server is actually better because you can force calendars on projects. You can force calendars for certain kinds of people, or you can allow a blend of that. You can say, I want to force everybody to comply with this particular calendar, but they can also have their own, right? That kind of thing. You have a little bit of blend that you can do.
Can somebody on the server change their own personal calendar?
Yeah, right. So who uses Project Server in the class? Okay. So did you know that if you plan future administrative time on your timesheet, that for you as that resource, that will create a calendar outage for you? Did you guys know that? Yeah. Isn't that amazing? That's great, isn't it? That means I don't have to do it as a PM. You're going to be on vacation? Great. Go ahead and type that in. It takes it out of my calendar. My schedule can move around you. When you're here, we'll do that work, right? That's very clever. Good stuff.
If we had 2 people on test number 7,
Mm-hmm.
and they had, like the one guy didn't do your 4-day thing.
Okay. Sure.
How would you do
The task would extend. Okay, so it assumes that both people have to do the work that you've assigned them individually. So if you've got 40 hours and I've got 40 hours, you take 5 days to do it because you're on, 8 hours a day, 5 days. I'm on 10 hours a day for 4 days, right? The task is going to be 5 days long as a duration, right? Because it assumes I've got to do my part and you've got to do your part. When you're done and I'm done, the task is done.
So it's showing us with our own calendars, but the task takes it.
Task takes the total duration until you say it's complete and I say it's complete. Yep. Does that make sense? Sort of? Okay, great. Yeah, all right. Okay. So let's go back. What are some best practices? I like to have a shared company calendar. It's easier to do with Project Server, but have something that we all agree to as the list of holidays that we're going to have, right? So if I see your plan, you see my plan, I can expect those things to be there. I shouldn't be surprised, okay? All right. I like to create calendars for special task behaviors that I know are going to happen, such as a release window. Well, that's an IT term, right? But the idea being that there's a certain amount of time at once a month that thing can happen, right? So I'll create a calendar with everything blocked out except for that event. That way, if I miss that event, it schedules into the next window that was available to me, okay? So I'll create things. Maybe sometimes I have a task that I have to work on the weekend. Who likes to work on the weekend? Everybody. Oh, great. All right. Fantastic. All right. So, yeah, maybe I might have a task just for that weekend work, right, to represent that I'm going to be there and the task needs to be done during the weekend, okay? And I'll have to have a custom calendar for my resource for that weekend work if they're not already working on the weekend. Okay. So, I like to adjust resource calendars with vacation, training, meetings, and conferences. Those of you who use Project Server, try that. Try that whole thing. I'm scheduling vacation into the future and see what it does. You'll like it. Okay. Let's talk about constraints. All right. Constraints provide limits to the left and right movement of the task. If you look at the Gantt chart, that's the left and right movement of that task that you're going to be limited on. All right. The questions would be, hey, you know what? Are you allowed as a task to happen sooner? Is that allowed for you? Constraints answer that question. Are you allowed to happen later or finish later or whatever the answers or whatever the question you have is? It controls that. That's what these constraints do. Now, the default setting, we have every task you've ever created inside of Microsoft Project has a constraint. It has a constraint setting. And that default setting is ASAP, as soon as possible. Okay? There's also as late as possible. Anybody use as late as possible scheduling in the room? A few of you? Great. Okay, yeah. So that's a different mind shift for how these things work. But the math is the same, right, isn't it? The math is calculated the same way. So these constraints provide us with either finishing earlier, finishing later, things like that. We can create constraints that partially constrain, that says, okay, well, you're allowed to start anytime after a certain date, but not before that. Very much like that start link type. Or we can have things that fully constrain it. And I'll see this a lot. People say, hey, look, I've got to hit that deadline. My boss said so. What do you do? Right? People, anybody put that finish milestone or that, whatever you're shooting for, maybe that task, put a must finish on date on that? Remember those easy button commercials that place has, whatever that place is? Yeah? Yeah, there's no easy button for this, right? Just because I put a must finish on doesn't guarantee that I can just forget about it. It's all going to be perfect, right? No, I have to manage my plan. So don't fool yourself into a must finish on date just because you think that's the right thing to do, okay? Make sure you believe in that date. Make sure that that's really what you believe in every time you look at your plan. All right. So let's do a demo for constraint types really quick. We'll talk about a few of those. Okay. All right. So simple mistakes that we can type in things here and there, move some things here and there, will actually create constraints for us. Right now, I don't have any constraints on this first task. And if you look at the indicators column, I can't say I don't have any. I have the ASAP, right? I've got the default one, the one that doesn't show up in the column. I do have a constraint on that task. In fact, if I double-click it and I go to the Advanced tab, you'll see there's a constraint type area called, it's got a constraint type of as soon as possible, and might or might not have a date on it. But I can do things here that move that task around, such as drag it left to right. That's an obvious thing. It's put it into the next week, right? But at the same time, it's also created a constraint, right? And I got, if I hover over it, a start no earlier than constraint. This says you can start later than it, but right now you can't start any sooner than that date, whatever date that was that I drug it to. Well, that's an obvious thing. You probably wouldn't intentionally drag tasks around like that. Maybe you would, I don't know. But another thing we do, especially the first time we start using Microsoft Project, we'll actually come in here and we'll start typing in a date, right? 1/2/2012. That's when it's going to happen. And, of course, now I've got to scoot way over to find it. But you'll see that I've also created a constraint that's a start no earlier than constraint on that task by typing in a start date. If you type in your start dates, you type in your finish dates, you may not realize it, but you're creating constraints. And those constraints restrict the movement of that task either left or right, depending on the version of project that you're using and what you typed in last. All right, if I type in a finish no later than, or if I type in a finish date, I'll get a different kind of constraint on that task when I do that. It'll change the constraint type. All right, so how do I fix a constraint? Fix is the wrong word. How do I change the constraint back to the default? How do I remove a constraint? You don't really remove them. You just put them back to whatever you'd like, ASAP. In my case, I click OK, and we're back to where we started. Okay. So let's go through these. I've got the order parts, but the parts are on back order. What should be the relationship between these two tasks, you think? Right? Certainly got a start and finish relationship between them. But the parts are on back order until next week. I'll just go ahead and put it out there. Is that the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? Sometimes it is. Sometimes constraints can be the right thing to do. Right? Have a story to tell. Have a reason you're using a constraint. Don't just do it willy-nilly. Don't do it on accident. Don't say, I don't know why that's there. Right? Hover over this, I'm going to get, hey, I've got to start no earlier than whenever the parts come in. Right? Okay. Standing up a roadblock and starting our Independence Day parade. By the way, how bad would it be if we didn't have the roadblock in place? That would be kind of bad, wouldn't it? All right, okay, so we want to have that done. These are linked already. I might have a nice relationship here, but the truth is that I probably need to put that start date on Independence Day, don't I? Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we'll say July 4th is where it is. I don't really need to stand the roadblock up now, though, do I? What's the right thing to do here? What's a good choice here? So I've got a start no earlier than for my parade, my fireworks. That seems the right thing to do. What am I going to do with that one, though? I like that, yeah. That's your style. That's the way you like it. All right, so as late as possible. We'll do it that way. And if I scroll over to that date, eventually, we'll see it. And it's backed up, right? So that the first task is happening as late as possible. The second task is pushing it back that way. So they meet at the right place, don't they? All right, so again, don't let people get squished in your projects. Use constraints wisely. We don't want people getting squished by not having roadblocks up. All right, so stuff that has to happen first, and then really important project tasks with a due date. What do we do about that? It's very, very tempting to put a must finish on constraint here. But it's not wise. Instead, we've got another feature that we can use. I'll just briefly touch on that. You may not know about it. There's apparently some visual problem that we as humans have in finding this one text box on this particular dialog box. Under constraint dates, there's a deadline. Big drop down. How do we miss it? Has anybody noticed this for the first time right now, by the way? Okay, maybe. All right. So I can put a deadline here, and that deadline might be, we'll say the 30th. I click OK, and it puts a little green arrow out here. In fact, I'll move it out a little bit so you can see it better. I'll move it to the 6th, so a week later. And it puts a little green arrow out there. In 2007, it'd be a different color. Same idea. It's an arrow. And if I exceed that arrow, it doesn't stop my task from moving. It shouldn't, as much as I'd love to say, I'm going to hit my deadline, I shouldn't constrain the task that it can't move past the deadline, right? Instead, what do I want to do? I want to see the train coming before I get run over by it, right? I want to know the problem before it happens. So what am I going to do? I'm going to extend these tasks. I'll move the first one. I'll make it 10 days long. So far, so good. But what happens if I go to 11 days? Should the second task move past the deadline indicator? Yes or no? Yes, that's the right thing to have happen. Yeah, it went past its deadline. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe that's bad news. Maybe people are getting squished because the roadblocks aren't up. I don't know. But it happened. And we can see that it's going to happen. So I get a little indicator over here in my indicators column. If I hover over that, it tells me something bad is about to happen. I could do several things with that. One of the things I could do to fix that problem we've already talked about was some lead. Yeah, I could do -3 days, right? Something like that. Maybe your task relationship has that kind of, you could put lead on that. Maybe not. You get to decide what's the right approach. Microsoft Project wants to show you the problem, but you as the PM get to decide what the right solution is for that problem. Maybe throw money at it. Maybe throw resources at it. Maybe, like I just did, maybe do some lead or some, fast tracking. You get to figure that out. Okay? All right, so That's what that's all about. All right, constraint types. Use them sparingly, have a story to tell. Is that fair enough? Anybody get one of those projects from their peers that left the company or that's on vacation or something, and you look down the left-hand side and it's got nothing but little calendar icons over there, you know, every task is constrained? That's not a great feeling. Not a great feeling. All right, so what are the best practices here? Must finish on constraints do not guarantee success. If they did, we put must finish on constraints on the last thing in our plan, we go home. Right? All right. Use constraints to control the start or the finish of a task when you have things like hire dates or deliveries or whatever it is that's really constrained somehow outside of your control, that isn't dynamically moving left to right. It has some amount of constraint on it. All right. Be aware that you can create constraints accidentally. Watch that indicators column. Don't type dates in the start or finish field. All right. Let's keep going. Manually scheduled tasks. There's a new task mode inside of 2010. So manually scheduled tasks, we can use those to move things back and forth, and they're very much like constraints. You guys use manually scheduled tasks at all? Yeah? A lot of you? Okay, good. All right. So manually scheduled tasks allow us to control things back and forth, but it's basically, completely apart from what the scheduling engine wants to do. All right? So our default, when you pull it out of the box, is actually manually scheduled mode. The first time you install Microsoft Project on your desk, it's in a manually scheduled mode. If you want to take advantage of all this task movement that's good task movement, as long as you are ready to understand that, ready to try to understand that, put it into automatically scheduled mode. And you'll see, as we look at my PC real quick, you'll see that you can see a task mode column by default on the Gantt chart view. And they also give you a place to change that down here, right? They give you a place to change it on the ribbon. You'll see up here, I can change it right here as well. And you can also set it as a default in the settings of Microsoft Project. And if you're using Project Server, you can force a default on everybody that connects to Project Server, okay? Which is nice. All right, so that's our manually scheduled tasks. I'll do the demo real quick for you. We'll do a quick demo for manually scheduled tasks, right? So I'll just do manually scheduled task. What can I do with a manually scheduled task that I can't do with an automatic scheduled task? How long did that last task take that you guys did on your projects? How long was that? A while? Yeah? When's that going to get done? About 3 days? Okay, I'm going to type in about 3 days. Wow. So is that really different than our automatically scheduled tasks, you think? Yeah. Okay. So truly, that scheduling engine is broken for, well, broken is the wrong term. That scheduling engine is off for the most part with these manually scheduled tasks. Now, the great thing about manually scheduled tasks is they are fantastic for sprints. They're fantastic for future planning far in the future. They're really useful for a lot of that stuff. In fact, there's some great sessions here on using manually scheduled tasks, okay, to plan with. So if you haven't gone to one of those, anybody go to, there was one yesterday for that, I think. Was it yesterday? Yeah? Yeah? Did you go to that? Did you like that session? Yeah? It's a good session. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead. We're talking about, through these, we get, all right, so, manually scheduled tasks, our best practices are, use them when their planning details are unknown. Plan your tasks far into the future with them. Good to use them with agile methodologies. They're very helpful for that. Make sure if you do have them that you change to auto-schedule mode before the tasks start. Okay, leveling. Do a real quick example on leveling. Then we'll move on. All right, so leveling. Anybody use leveling on their projects? No? All right, so what leveling does is it allows me to take two tasks that don't have any dependencies except for the fact that they've got the same resource. And it says, you know what, look, this resource is over-allocated. You've got them 40 hours on this task and 40 hours on that task. And as nice as Doug is, he's not going to be working 80 hours this week. All right, so I need to do something about that. Leveling helps me solve that problem. If I go to the Resource tab of the ribbon, I can click on Level Resource. And what that will do is allow me to pick the resource. I click Level Now. And it moves the tasks around. So that they are now no longer asking Doug to be over-allocated. right? Now, it didn't use a constraint to do that, right? There's no indicator column. There's no constraint there, okay? What it did use is something called leveling delay. And there's pretty much a column for everything in Microsoft Project, but we're going to see leveling delay. So if we say leveling delay, you can see that one task is moved by 7 E days, right? 7 elapsed duration days. It's been scooted over by that. And if I reset it to 0 E days, it puts it back to the original problem we had, right? So leveling tries to solve problems for us. Leveling's great for these what-if scenarios. What would happen if I didn't have anybody working in an over-allocated way, right? But it's probably not something I would leave on all the time. Does anybody leave it on all the time? No? Some? No? Okay. I usually don't. Just the Travis way. I usually don't. You might have a different way of doing it. Okay. All right, so there's our demo for leveling tasks. What are best practices? Use it as a what-if tool, right? You can also combine it with things like a priority settings. If you're using priority for your projects, there's a priority column. You can show that inside of your project, and leveling will help obey that priority rule. Which one comes first, which one comes second. If you're using Project Server, you can actually give all your projects a priority as well. You can do that without Project Server if you wanted to, but Project Server makes it easy. Give all your projects priority and manage it that way as well. Okay, so the reason we came. Painters, policemen, and the Pope. What do they have to do with task management? Anything? No? Okay, so one of the fundamental things we struggle with when it comes to task management inside of Microsoft Project is task types. Okay? Does anybody know what task types are? A few of you? Okay, so there are things in there called fixed work, fixed duration, right? Fixed units, things like that. We'll talk about those. Now, what I want to do is give you some tools to really remember this stuff, right? So we've got the painters, we've got the policemen, and of course we've got the Pope. Okay. All tasks have a task type. Every task you've ever created had a task type. The default in Project 2010 is different from the default in Project 2007, just barely, right? This one's fixed units, not effort driven, by the way, if you want to know. Okay? So in 2007, it was fixed units, effort driven, yes. It was a little different. Okay? All these task types, these task fixed units, fixed duration, fixed work, they're always applied to your task whether you realize it or not. Now, many companies, you might be in one of those. You might be in charge of choosing which one. Many companies will standardize just to make it easy on their people. They'll standardize on one of these, right? All the projects, all their templates have it all the way down through. But I want you to be in charge of which one you're using. And I want you to have an easy way to remember, an easy story to tell your manager why you've chosen that task type, why your task is going to behave the way it behaves. Okay? So we've got the painters, we've got the policemen, and the Pope. We're going to go over those things. So the painters. If I've got a client that needs 2 rooms painted, each room takes 8 hours, there's only 2 days to complete the work. That sounds all fine and good, but then somebody calls and says, hey, you know what, I'm going to cut your duration down. How are we going to do that? All right, we might have several different approaches to doing that. In our case, we're going to add another painter. I got another painter, we're going to add another painter to it. So if I add another painter to that problem, what should happen to the duration? I guess still got the same amount of work to do, right? So I've got a fixed work task type because the work was 16 hours worth of work. Is there still 16 hours worth of work to do? Yeah, but I'm dividing it up between 2 people. So it's going to get done faster, right? So my duration shrinks. On a fixed work type of task, I add a second person, the duration shrinks. All right? That's the painter. I add another painter, the duration shrinks. Let's go to the next one, the policeman. So what's the background on that? I've got a parade going on today. I've got one policeman standing around. I need to add a second policeman. What is that going to do to the duration of the parade? Huh? Nothing. Yeah, Zippo. Right, yeah. So the policemen are what? Fixed duration. Yeah, fixed duration. So an easy way for you to remember these things, the painters, the policemen, and how many popes do we have? 1, right. So that's probably fixed units. Yeah, so we're going to get there too, right. So no matter how many policemen I have, right, the parade is going to be the same. Which variable remained the same, the duration? Which variable did we change? units. Okay. What happened? Work got changed. I'm going to pay these people 8 hours each to stand around, so my work went way up, didn't it? Okay. And then the Pope got one of those. No matter how much I might want to have two of them because he's got to be in two places at once, I've got one. Okay? So I have to work around that limitation. That is my limitation, my fixed units, which is one of the reasons why Project comes with that as a default, is because we do really have a constraint usually around the resources that we're putting on our tasks. All right? It's not an infinite pool usually to us. Okay? And you get to pick which one's the right one for you. You need to be in charge of which choice you're making. The painter on that task? Is it a policeman on that task? Is it the Pope on that task? Probably not really the Pope on that task, by the way. But okay. All right, so Pope is fixed units. Which variable is locked? Units. Which variable would we change? We change duration because he's going to go to 2 different meetings in 2 different places. Microsoft Project would have calculated the work variable for us. Okay, so let's do a quick demo on that. We'll do test types. Here I've got fixed work, fixed duration, fixed units, and I've got the painters, the policeman, and the Pope. All right, each one on a 10-day task. I'm going to highlight each one of these by holding my control key and clicking on them. I'm going to use the Assign Resources dialog box, and I'm going to assign a second resource. I've got Jackson on there now. I'm going to assign Molly, and as soon as I assign Molly, what should happen? I've got a second resource on each of these 3 types. They're all going to behave differently. Yeah? So let's close it and let's see what happened. One of them shrunk, fixed work. Fixed duration stayed where it was because it's fixed duration. Fixed units stayed where it was because I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to temporarily unlock units and say that there's 2 Popes. Okay? Now I've got to pay both of them all the time for this whole work right now. Yeah? So I've got 160 hours dedicated to that. So that's the same kind of thinking. So in your world, think. Do I have a painter? Do I have a policeman? Do I have a Pope on this particular task? It's a great way for you to come back and say, I learned something about task movement inside of Microsoft Project, right? So, okay, let's move on. There's more to learn, a little bit more to learn about this. That's the effort-driven setting. Can't talk about that without talking about effort-driven. And there's been a couple of sessions on that here. I think this is going to be an easy way for you guys to get to grips with this. You got the painters, the policeman, and the Pope, and then the who's he, what's it. Yeah. So this is, every task has an effort-driven setting. It is off by default, like I mentioned, in Project 2010, but you can turn it on. You can pick when to turn it on. There is a column for that, right, called effort-driven. You can show that column right next to the list of tasks that you have. And it adds an additional rule. Well, you see lots of explanations on the internet for what this does. Okay? Adds an additional rule for calculating work. All right? I would say, for the purpose of the rest of the session, think of it like also, locking work. If we're calling a fixed work task a locked work task, think of it as also being a lock on work. All right? It locks that work. And you can combine that task type setting to further control the behavior, right? So if I have a fixed units setting, I can have effort-driven on or off, right? I can say my units are constrained, but so is my amount of work. That's possible. That might be a real world. You might live in a situation like that frequently. All right. So, yeah, this does relate to fixed work. If I have a fixed work task, it's going to always have the effort-driven setting set to yes. You cannot change it for a fixed work type of task. The painters have an effort-driven setting of yes. Okay? You get to choose it for the policeman and the Pope. Okay? All right. Here's a great point at the bottom of the slide. When a task has an effort-driven setting of yes, if you're taking notes, this is a great note. When a task has an effort-driven setting of yes, Project obeys that effort-driven setting rule first. Then it moves on to the task type rule. Then it changes that 3rd variable. Okay? It does it in that order. That's how it does it. Took me a long time to find the answer to that. Anybody struggle with that? That's a good thing to take away from this particular session. All right. So a quick demo on that. All right, so I've got fixed work, fixed duration, fixed units, all of them set to effort-driven yes, and you'll see I can't even change. There's little drop-downs disabled for me to change the fixed work type. I can't change it. It's always effort-driven. Painters are always effort-driven. If I add a second person to each of these, I've got Jackson again. I've got Jackson on these. right? I highlight them, I do the same behavior. I highlight them, I assign Molly to them. I click close. I'll have some behaviors that I'm expecting. Let's look at our Gantt bars and see what happened, right? Some of them, the duration went from 10 days down to 5 days. The duration shrunk, okay? How many of them had the work change? None. Why? Because effort-driven is fixed work, right? The work is locked, okay? It's locked work, if you want to call it that, all right? So yeah, one of the things you'll notice, without getting way too into this, is that they've changed the behavior of the fixed duration, effort-driven yes type in 2010. Usually what we would see over here is Jackson at 50% and Molly at 50%. You guys see that before in your life? You ever see that little 50% next to their names? It still does that, it just doesn't show it here, okay? Still does the math, it's just not shown here. If I go look at one of the resource usage views, right? Go look at one of the task usage view. You can look at that. Where's my task usage view? There we go. You'll see that for that particular task, that they are indeed, instead of working 8 hours a day, they've now gone down to just 4 hours a day. So 50% of their day on that task. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so does that mean that in 2007 I assigned my resources including the percentage? So can I still do that in 2010?
Sure, you absolutely can. My tip for that, if you really want to be able to do that well, would be to show the work column and the duration column. Do your duration, we'll just have a new task here, right? Do your duration column first before you assign a person to it of maybe 5 days, and then set a different work estimate of maybe half of that, 20 hours, right? So I would think 5 days with 40 hours normally if it was 100%. But if I set it 20 hours and I assign a particular resource to it, like Jackson, Jackson will come in with that number next to him. In fact, on that fixed duration task, I could go in and type bracket, 50% bracket, and it would keep it. It just doesn't show it to us there by default anymore. And there's an article, if you'd like to Google it, there's an article on why, and it's called peak units. If you want to Google something called peak units, you'll have a nice big article on how to understand why it's doing this new behavior. But the math is essentially the same for this, okay? So nothing really to worry about with that. Okay. All right, so best practices with that, pick a task type for the project, but always confirm that each task is set correctly, right? Make sure that you don't just turn your mind off and say, oh, well, everything's fixed work. Well, maybe not always. Some tasks are fixed duration, all right? You have to be in charge of that. Don't let the tool be in charge of you. You're in charge of the tool. You get to pick what's going on each task. Make sure you pick wisely. Make sure it makes some sense to you when you have to tell the story about it. All right. Determine if work should also be locked. So should I have the effort-driven setting on yes or no? Okay? Estimate your duration and your work separately. Like you pointed out, I might have 2 different estimates for my work and my duration. Assign resources to the tasks after all those above steps have been done, right? Get that in order first, okay? That's a great best practice for you. You know, you don't really have to worry about it too much anymore, but it's a good best practice. All right. Use the task usage view as needed to check and see what's going on day by day with your resources. You saw me flip over there and show that people are working 4 hours a day, right? You could do that too, right? You go there and look and see what day by day, how many hours are you working on this task? Okay? So that brings me to status, date, and task parts. So the last thing, last basic idea that I want to cover in the class, in the session. And I do want to talk about these because I think they're probably my favorite part of the tool. They're probably one of the most important things that you can do to your project. And if you're not using them successfully, I think that you should. And this really, we've talked about task movement all throughout this, but this is really saying, well, Microsoft Project didn't move the tasks, now I'm going to move them, right? So it's now your turn to be the force behind the task movement as opposed to watching the tool do it. It's an important thing to do. All right, so we're going to talk about the status date and task parts. So a status date is really where you're going to go and set up maybe a team meeting. You guys have weekly meetings with your staff? Yes? Okay. So maybe once a week or monthly or no meetings whatsoever. I saw some of that in the room, I think. But yeah, so I have these meetings with my staff. So I have, in my case, let's say weekly meetings with my staff. And I'm gonna show you a plan where some amount of work has been done. So I'm tracking my project. Some amount of work has been done. It's a very simple plan. You can see I've started, so my start milestone's finished. You can also see that the first task is done. And the second task has a little bit of work done on it. It's right, 50% complete, about halfway done. Now, I usually would not type in 50% complete. I go about that a different way. And if you'd like to find out why I come to the Learning Tree class, and you can find out all that I have to say about that. But okay, so I've got 50% done here. One of the things is maybe I go to my, I've even got a finished milestone. I've got a deadline indicator on it. That's a nice, good behavior. I've talked about that already. How's my project doing? Am I great? All right, raise your hand if I'm great. Where's today? Today, if you can see it over there, is right here. It's a red. Why am I in trouble? Nothing's gone past the deadline. I'm sorry, you're wrong. I'm good. I told my boss this already today. I must be good. The tool must be wrong, yeah.
When you do the resource leveling or when you level it, very rarely, even if you choose the buttons to say push the work out past the status date, it doesn't actually usually do that.
There's some funny behaviors, especially when you have Project Server in the mix, when it comes to automatically doing what I'm about to do. So you make a good point. So let me go through it, right? So what have I got here? I've got a problem, don't I? Anybody have a time machine? No? Okay, so I would need a time machine if I wanted to go back in time to last Tuesday, the 13th, and begin working on the rest of this task. I would need that, wouldn't I? Nobody in their right mind should expect me to go back in time to Tuesday and work on that task, right? Where should that work happen? After today, probably. If I said today was my status meeting, I figured out it wasn't done, probably after today, right? If you've been taking a plan like this to your boss and saying, yeah, look, we're great, guess what? Might not have been 100% accurate, right? So what are we going to do? I'm going to highlight task B in this case, just to make this very, very simple. You can highlight them all. And I'm going to show you a couple things here on the menus that we have, right? So one of the things I have available to me is this move area, right? And I've set my status date to be today. And I'll show you where I set that. I set that on the project tab of the ribbon. There's a little status date area. And I can just click on it. I can set it to today, right? And I've set it to today at 5 p.m. All right? That's when my project plan is going to be at its best. I've had my team meeting. I've updated my plan. Status date is today. So if I go back to the task tab of the ribbon, I've highlighted task B. I can click on the move button. And there's incomplete parts to status date. If I click on that, it put it at the end of Wednesday. Put it really at the beginning of Thursday. Is that the right thing to do? Isn't it the right thing to do? I believe that it is. I believe that it's something that we don't do enough of. In fact, what I like about this is if I do this every week, I can look, I can even look at those gray bars as weeks, and I can see what chunks of work got done every week if I just look top to bottom inside of each pair of gray bars. Right? That was done this week. And then the next week, I'd have another set of chunks. The next week, I'd have it until everything was done. And that's a great story to tell. Why aren't we on time with this project? Well, here, let me show you. This is where things went awry, right? You can see it for yourself. It's a very visual way to perceive your progress chunk by chunk throughout your plan. Okay? So that's what that movement does. There's actually several ways to do this in the tool. You guys could find out more about that, but that's an easy way for you to do it. The opposite is true too. If I was to come down to task D and I was to put 50% complete on that, that's kind of in the wrong spot too, isn't it? Right? I didn't go forward in time and work 50% on that task. When did I do that work? I did that sometime already in the past, didn't I? That should be over that way. That should be on your left-hand side. So I click on Move, and there's the opposite, right, which is completed parts back to the scheduled date. So whatever part of that task was completed, scoot it back to at least happening on Wednesday. Okay? All right, do you guys use that feature of the tool at all? Yeah. Please try. Try it. Right? Please try. Okay. Huh? No, it actually, it doesn't create a constraint for that task. It actually, it just places the percent complete. It puts the actual start date of that task. It just does some math. It puts the actual start date of that task in an appropriate place, okay? And it splits the task into what they call task parts, and it puts the remainder of that into a different place. Said a different way, you can actually perceive that much better if you go to the task usage view. And I'll find our little task here, wherever it is. I can't see it very well. Oh, I don't have anybody on it right now. If I had a resource on it, it would show up here. You can see it in the task usage view simply by showing the amount of work that's happening each and every day. And you see a gap of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 until there's more work to happen on that task, right? So you'd see actuals, then you'd see remaining and all that kind of stuff. Yes, so I've got a few questions out there. I tell you what, let me get through a couple slides and then I have nothing but time for questions. Is that fair? Okay. All right. So let's go to best practices. So I would say every period, set a status date, update the progress on the tasks. There's, of course, several ways to do that in the tool. Some of them are even automatic, depending on your scenario. All right? Move the task parts to update your schedule. If you don't do that before you turn in a status report, right? Not the best idea. Okay? Conclusions. Raise your hand if you learned something. I got a few hands. Awesome. Great. Okay, good. Fantastic. What reviewed? We've reviewed the usual suspects, duration, links, calendars, constraints, a little bit of manually scheduled tasks, leveling. We did some lag and lead, that kind of stuff. We also talked about, say it with me, the what? Yeah, what are the painters? Fixed work. What are the policemen? Fixed duration. What are the Pope? Fixed units. Yes, can you guys remember that? Yes, you can. Great. All right. Status, date, and task parts. What is that? Is that important? Yes? Unless you've got a time machine, then you're good. All right. So I'll do Q&A. I'll come back to that slide. Actually, I've got to show this. Microsoft wants me to show this, which is, hey, please fill out an evaluation. If you like this session, let them know. Let them know, please, if you like this session. And also, there are other sessions, some of them that really relate to this, that are kind of expounded onto one or two parts of this. This is kind of a quick overview of a lot of things. But some that go really deep into certain parts of this, they've already kind of happened in the last couple of days. So I'm kind of at the tail end of that. But please, when you do get online access to all these sessions, go back and watch some of those other ones that you've got access to. Okay? If you have questions, find me. I'll be here all day tomorrow, answer any questions you've got, and I'll make you this promise. If you come across a task movement scenario that you can't solve, you can email me. All right? And I'll go back eventually and put my email up here, which is right there. Tрэвис Krittenden at planfurther.com. You come across something you can't solve task movement-wise, email me. I'll help you. Okay? Fair enough? All right, good. Give yourselves a round of applause. You get to go drinking. Yes.